The year of 2024 saw many ups and downs for AEW. Most notably among the downs was the attendance of its live events. AEW has announced going into 2025 that they'll be running noticeably smaller venues. I'm going to tell you now why that's a good thing. Welcome everybody, Benza here. I'm here to tell you not only why AEW running smaller venues is a good thing, but why I fully support that. Now, before we get started, make sure to do that follow, like, subscribe gimmick, as you've been taught to do with many YouTube videos before. Now we have to remember when AEW first started, the genesis behind the idea was to be an alternative to the WWE. In essence, sort of making themselves a, quote, super indie. Personally, as an independent wrestling fan, I absolutely loved this idea, and it was one of the big reasons why I initially got behind AEW as a promotion. Now, you can't really fault a company that is white hot right off the bat for running bigger venues. Now, for bigger venues, we're talking the basketball venue-y size, 15,000 to 20,000 seat capacity. I mean, if you're hot and popular right out the get-go, why wouldn't you want to fill an arena with as many fans as possible? I mean, that only makes sense. This isn't to say that this necessarily was one of the reasons that AEW got snake bit a couple years into their existence into now having to run smaller venues. I do need to say that AEW initially running smaller venues and then gradually working their way up, I'm not sure if that would necessarily change the direction that the company has gone. Rather, just an observation about taking baby steps to get to the finish line instead of trying to long jump to the finish line, so to speak. If you've been to a big arena show or possibly even a stadium event, you know that the pomp and circumstance and bombastic fanfare that happens is quite literally a sight to behold. The type of energy you get from 50,000 people being inside one structure, all with one similar goal, it is truly a feeling that is near indescribable. Now, I will say that by and large, those canvases, if you will, those big stadiums, the 50,000 seater pluses, are typically reserved for your pay-per-views or premium live events. However, over the past year of 2024, we've seen Raw and SmackDown both running those basketball-y size arenas. And I said earlier that I was an AEW fan. I'm a fan of all wrestling. I know, I'm a fan of all wrestling, but what you gonna do? I watch it all. I watch WWE the less, and it's mostly just due to ease of watching. Now that we're into 2025, I can watch Raw on Netflix. Super stoked behind that. However, I will say, watching the product does lose a little bit of its edge when the canvas that the product is in is almost sterile in a way. Not that it's not exciting, but if you've ever been to a basketball arena, once you get inside the thing and get to the actual center where the arena is, or the ring in our example of wrestling, kind of boring. It's mostly the same shit all the time. Now, I'll give you the outside of these structures, phenomenal and beautiful. There is parts of modern architecture that I do like. The glass, the clean lines, sure. But once you get inside, past concessions, past all the concourses, past all the fun new fancy shit, all these big venues are pretty much the same. Now, to a degree, that is sort of a no shit Sherlock statement. I mean, there's only so much variation you can do to a basketball court, or a football field, or a wrestling ring, because these things are all supposed to be the controlled variables in our sports or our fighting operas, if you will. However, with all that being said, go back and watch the recent run that AEW did in the Hammerstein Ballroom. I can tell you right now that when my wife and I sat down to watch Collision on that Saturday, as soon as the feed started and she saw that it was the Hammerstein, her first reaction was wow. There is a different type of feel that goes into having these different venues. Now, you might be one of those fans that you're focusing just what's happening in the ring, and you don't really give a care about what's happening outside. If the fans are lit up or not, if you can see 3 tiers of fans behind the talent or not. I'm one of those people that I sort of like to be immersed in the event, what's happening. A place like the Hammerstein Ballroom is not only iconic, but it's beautiful to look at. Of course, we're focusing on what's happening in the ring, but having these backdrops on which the action can stand out more vibrantly against, as opposed to something cold and uninviting as a stadia, I don't know, to me it just adds that little bit more je ne sais quoi that makes wrestling hit that much deeper. Another AEW example that I can think of recent history was over the summer of 2024 when they took up residence in the Arlington Esports Complex. This is an arena that is made for esports viewing and tournaments. The capacity of this was just over 2,500, and every single one of these shows had a unique feel from the other collisions that didn't take place in this esports complex. And for me, it added an extra layer of difference between Collision and Dynamite, where at the time, Collision almost felt more like a studio TV show, which, being a fan of 80s wrestling, I particularly love as well. Whereas Dynamite was more of the big bombastic show in front of huge crowds of fans. And if we look at an example that's coming in the near future, AEW will be visiting my hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. Traditionally, AEW and WWE have ran shows in what's now called the Footprint Center, home of the Phoenix Suns, seats 18,000 people. For old heads like me, it will always be the America West. Single tier. AEW has announced that their next Phoenix show is going to be run at the Phoenix Financial Center. This is a much smaller venue, seats about 5,000 people, and as you can see, it is definitely not a typical wrestling venue in that it's much more of a music / maybe a play performance venue. While I haven't been to the Phoenix Financial Center, I've been to the American West Center many times for both live events and basketball games.
It's more than adequate and, dare I say, a fantastic place to take in a spectacle of a live event. However, I am more intrigued with seeing this new venue that AEW has picked out.
The advantage of running these smaller venues is not only is the venue going to be packed, and you get much more of the crowd on top of you feel, but aesthetically, you get differences, which I'm just going to tell you right now, that was the whole point of doing this company, was to be different. So let's fucking do it. Different camera lines, different angles,
and I would say most importantly for me, that unique week-to-week canvas that will be ever-changing for our beautiful fighting opera to fight in front of.
Speaking as someone who is possibly on the shorter side of life and someone who is married to somebody who is on the shorter side of life, having seating available where short people can easily see the action in a ring is truly beneficial, which is why the balcony shows and balcony venues are much more my cup of tea. To me, these are all vastly beneficial positives. Now, it all can't be positive. The drawbacks of running the smaller venues, I can only begin to imagine, mostly because I don't know a thing about fucking logistics. But I can tell you this, load in and load out is going to be much more difficult for the crew. Smaller venues, you're going to have much less opportunity to use a whole bunch of pyro and cannons and shit like that. And not just from a production standpoint, but also from a fan standpoint. Typically with the larger arenas, there are more easily available parking. You have typically better concessions, better sightlines when you get into the venue, and typically it's a lot easier to get in and out and enjoy your time. Some smaller venues, their added quirks can, well, be a pain in the ass sometimes. Oftentimes we're talking about less bathroom facilities. Sometimes the sightlines aren't all they're cracked up to be. There is the added level of difficulty that the venue simply can't provide ample parking or concessions or ease of use for their own venue for that many people for an event that's happening at their venue that maybe they typically don't cater to. However, anything worth doing has to go through some growing pains. I have the belief that AEW might have flown a little too close to the sun early on as far as running their regular Dynamite and then Collision programming in these bigger arenas. How about we embrace that scale back, embrace being that super indie, and run these venues like the Hammerstein? I don't know, maybe the Viking Pavilion up at Portland State University instead of the Moda Center. Maybe more esoteric places like the Memorial Auditorium in Sacramento instead of the Golden One Center. I don't know. just some thoughts and some tidbits for y'all to digest in the early weeks of 2025. Anyway, if you have any thoughts or comments, leave them for me below and maybe I'll get back to you. I'm not sure. I'll probably go be watching wrestling, and you should too. Until next time, this is Benza. Deuces.